The citations arrived at dawn, delivered not by mail, but by Patricia herself, who rang Sarah's doorbell at 6:45 a.m. sharp. The staccato chiming echoed through the house like a musical assault, followed by the distinct sound of high heels clicking impatiently on the front porch. Sarah opened the door, still in her coffee-stained pajamas, to find Patricia beaming with the artificial brightness of a department store display. In her manicured hands, she clutched a thick manila envelope adorned with no fewer than 7 different colored sticky tabs. "Good morning, Violator," Patricia chirped, somehow making the greeting sound simultaneously cheerful and menacing. "I've prepared a comprehensive documentation package regarding your numerous infractions." She thrust the envelope into Sarah's hands with the precision of a fencing master. Inside, Sarah found 5 citations written in Patricia's perfect calligraphy, each on different pastel-colored paper. The first was salmon pink, $200 for aggressive vegetable growth patterns, with a footnote citing the intimidating vertical stance of her tomato plants. The second, on mint green paper, demanded $150 for non-conforming soil color. Apparently, Sarah's organic compost was distressingly fertile-looking and unnecessarily dark. The third citation, written on lavender stationery, charged $175 for excessive plant productivity, complete with a graph comparing Sarah's vegetable yield to the acceptable suburban garden output metrics. The fourth, on baby blue paper, listed $125 for unauthorized use of sustainable gardening practices, with a special note condemning her rainwater collection system as suspiciously eco-conscious. The coup de grace came on sunny yellow paper, $100 for creating an unauthorized gathering spot for local birds, accompanied by time-stamped photos of cicadas daring to eat from Sarah's sunflower heads. "You'll notice," Patricia said, pulling out a pointer from her designer blazer, "that I've included photographic evidence, satellite imagery, and comprehensive documentation of each violation. The fines total $750, due within 14 days. She paused dramatically. "Cash, certified check, or credit card only. We also accept PayPal, but there's a 3% convenience fee." Through her security camera, Sarah watched Patricia perform a little victory dance on her way back to her pristinely maintained Tudor home, complete with artificial grass and plastic flowers that she spray-painted seasonally appropriate colors. The HOA president stopped briefly to adjust one of her mechanical birds, which chirped on schedule every hour between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Sarah spread the citations across her kitchen counter, noting that Patricia had even included a helpful P-chart showing how her garden violations compared to other neighborhood offenders. As she reached for her phone to begin documenting this bureaucratic theater of the absurd, a new notification popped up. Patricia had just tagged her in a neighborhood Facebook post titled "Examples of Non-Compliance," a cautionary tale in pictures. The battle lines were drawn. Sarah cracked her knuckles and opened her laptop. Time to put 15 years of environmental law practice to good use. Patricia Wilson was about to learn that some gardens came with thorns. The emergency HOA meeting was standing room only, held in the community center that Patricia had recently tried to convert into a meditation space for stressed HOA board members only. The crowd spilled out into the hallway, with neighbors passing snacks made from Sarah's illegally productive garden vegetables. Sarah's presentation was a masterpiece of legal precision and theatrical timing. Her PowerPoint began with a simple title, "A Garden of Deception: The Hidden Weeds of HOA Overreach." The first slide showed a time-lapse compilation of Patricia's garden invasions, set to the theme from Mission Impossible. Over the past month, Sarah began, standing confidently in her business suit, adorned with a small vegetable pin. "Mrs. Wilson has entered my property 17 times without permission. She has destroyed rare heirloom plants, attempted to enforce non-existent regulations, and created what I believe is the world's first database of criminally non-conforming vegetable heights." The evidence was damning. Drone footage showed Patricia measuring grass blade heights in various yards at midnight, her flashlight beam bouncing like a burglar's. Security cameras had caught her photographing children's chalk drawings with a ruler for unauthorized sidewalk arc dimensions. One particularly memorable clip showed her using facial recognition software on garden gnomes to ensure they didn't show excessive personality. The coup de grace came when Sarah revealed her piece de resistance, a comprehensive analysis of Patricia's own yard. According to Mrs. Wilson's own invented regulations, Sarah announced, pulling up a detailed spreadsheet, her property currently violates 17 of her citations. These include inappropriate flower symmetry, excessive artificial plant shininess, and my personal favorite, unauthorized shade of green, which she cited me for last week. Patricia, sitting in the front row in a pristine white pantsuit, sputtered about alternative compliance interpretations and aesthetic emergency powers. She frantically flipped through her binder of regulations, papers flying everywhere, until she finally stood up, brandishing a color swatch book like a weapon. But the property values, she wailed. Do you know what real plants do? They grow, unpredictably, without permission. The board's vote was unanimous. Patricia was removed from her position faster than her artificial grass could fade in the summer sun. Her replacement, Mrs. Patel, whose suspicious herb garden had become the neighborhood's favorite source of fresh mint for mojitos at community gatherings. Within a month, Patricia's house hit the market, advertised as a meticulously maintained property for buyers who appreciate rigid conformity. The real estate photos showed her artificial garden in all its plastic glory, though the agent had to Photoshop out the citation notices neighbors had started leaving on her mechanical birds. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Patel, immediately revised the guidelines. Sarah's garden became a symbol of resistance, and the following spring, the community hosted its first annual Grow as You Please garden tour. The crown jewel of the tour? Patricia's former yard, now transformed by the new owners into a riot of wildflowers and vegetables, with a sign that read, Nature, beautifully unpredictable. And Patricia, last anyone heard, she'd moved to a high-rise condo where she'd already begun measuring the clouds for unauthorized weather patterns. What Patricia didn't expect was Sarah's background as an environmental lawyer. On a sweltering Tuesday afternoon, while Patricia was conducting her third unauthorized garden inspection of the week, Sarah's plan snapped into action like a well-oiled mousetrap. The HOA president had just pulled out her premium color swatch book, the kind usually reserved for luxury car finishes, to document what she called unauthorized variations of green in Sarah's herb garden. She was so absorbed in matching the precise shade of basil leaves to her Pantone chart that she didn't notice the Channel 7 news van pulling up outside. And as you can see, Patricia was saying into her rose gold voice recorder, the oregano displays a flagrant disregard for approved herbaceous color schemes. Note to self, draft new bylaw regarding acceptable herb hues. She paused, squinting at a patch of mint. This spearmint is at least 3 shades more vibrant than regulation allows. The distinctive sound of camera equipment being assembled finally caught her attention. Patricia spun around, her designer sundress swishing, to find herself face-to-face with Monica Chen, the station's famous consumer watchdog reporter, and her cameraman already rolling. Mrs. Wilson, Monica began, microphone extended. We've received reports of unauthorized property invasions and questionable HOA enforcement practices. Would you care to comment on why you're measuring herbs with a protractor? Patricia's face cycled through colors that weren't on any of her approved charts. I'm conducting official HOA business. She clutched her clipboard to her chest like a shield. These plants are in clear violation of Section 12, Paragraph 3, Subsection D of our acceptable growth guidelines. By now, neighbors had begun gathering along the fence line. Betty Thompson from number 283 was live streaming on her iPad. The Rodriguez twins from across the street had brought out lawn chairs and were sharing a bowl of popcorn. Even Mr. Jenkins, who hadn't left his house since the Great Garden Gnome scandal of 2023, was peering through his Venetian blinds. And what exactly constitutes an acceptable growth guideline? Monica pressed, as Patricia backed into a tomato cage. That's when Patricia launched into what would later become known in the neighborhood as the Great Garden Manifesto. For 6 straight minutes, she delivered an impassioned speech about property values that somehow incorporated quotes from both Marie Antoinette, "Let them grow fake plants," and Martha Stewart, "It's a bad thing." She gesticulated wildly with her color swatches, accidentally knocking her designer sunglasses into a patch of non-regulation marigolds. The crowd grew larger. Sarah stood calmly by her back door, phone recording everything, as more neighbors arrived with stories of their own. Mrs. Chen from Oak Street described the time Patricia measured her wind chimes at midnight. The Patel family shared photos of Patricia cataloging their ethnically diverse and therefore suspicious garden. Even Patricia's next-door neighbor stepped forward with security footage of her measuring individual blades of grass with digital calipers at dawn. As the afternoon sun beat down, Patricia's perfectly coiffed hair began to wilt, much like the artificial flowers in her own yard. She had finally met her match, in a garden of all places. The snap of Sarah Martinez's prize tomato stem breaking was her first warning. Spinning around, she found Patricia Wilson, the HOA's newly elected president, holding the broken piece of her heirloom plant while scribbling furiously on her signature hot pink notepad. Sarah had heard rumors about Patricia's reign of terror in the neighboring community before she'd moved here to Oakwood Heights, but seeing her materialize in the backyard, like some cardigan-wearing apparition, was an entirely different matter. "Excuse me," Sarah managed, pulling off her gardening gloves. "But how did you get into my backyard?" She tried to keep her voice steady, despite watching Patricia's French manicured fingers crush her black creme tomato seedling, a rare variety she'd spent months nurturing from seed. Patricia adjusted her designer sunglasses, the oversized guxy frames catching the morning light along with her chunky turquoise jewelry. "As HOA president, I have full authority to inspect any visible portions of properties within our community." She pronounced authority with the same gravity one might use for nuclear launch codes. Through a locked gate, Sarah gestured to the now open gate, its newly installed padlock dangling uselessly. "I have master keys for all community access points," Patricia replied, as if this was as normal as having keys to her own house. She resumed her photography session of Sarah's garden, her iPhone 15 Pro Max making rapid-fire clicking sounds as she documented every leaf and stem. Sarah watched in mounting disbelief as Patricia pulled out an actual measuring tape from her Hermes handbag and began measuring the height of her tomato cages. The woman moved with the precision of a building inspector combined with the enthusiasm of a reality TV show host, muttering into a small voice recorder, "Garden implements exceeding regulated height restrictions, unauthorized plant support structures, evidence of non-approved soil amendments." "Those are just bamboo stakes," Sarah interjected. "They're temporary supports for." Section 7, Paragraph 4, Subsection C clearly states that all vertical garden elements must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Patricia cut in, not bothering to look up from her notepad. "Did you submit Form J7 for garden amendments? Or perhaps you have your SR3 for structural requirements?" Sarah's garden, her pride and joy, had been featured in the local newspaper just last month for its sustainable practices and organic yields. Now Patricia was treating it like a crime scene, documenting every cucumber vine and pepper plant with forensic thoroughness. "Your garden," Patricia declared, straightening her crisp white cardigan, "is a blight on our community's aesthetic integrity. Not to mention these unauthorized plant varieties." She gestured dismissively at Sarah's carefully cultivated heritage vegetables. "The approved plant list specifically calls for conventional varieties available at approved retail establishments." The absurdity of the situation hit Sarah as she watched Patricia measure the diameter of a zucchini with a digital caliper. This was the same woman who, at last month's community meeting, had proposed replacing all real grass in the neighborhood with artificial turf because nature is too unpredictable. Little did Patricia know, she had just declared war on the wrong gardener. Sarah smiled quietly, already formulating a plan. After all, she hadn't spent 15 years as an environmental lawyer without learning how to handle bureaucratic overreach.